Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter, or of course you can subscribe to the channel. Let's talk boxing. There's loads to cover today, and no better place to start than the massive breaking news that Anthony Joshua is said to be ready to accept £15 million as a step-aside fee to allow Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk to duke it out for the Undisputed Heavyweight Championship of the world. The news comes from Gareth A. Davis, a very prominent boxing and mixed martial arts journalist here in the UK. He also contends that Anthony Joshua would be allowed to fight the winner. This comes as a surprise to many people because AJ had given an interview not that long ago where some people were saying he was contradicting himself, and to an extent he was. He basically came out and said that he wouldn't even want to be approached with people coming to him and asking him to step aside. What is that? I'm think like a warrior. I'm not ready to hear that. But then, later on in that same interview, he spoke about if he was offered a massive offer, if the offer was just too crazy to turn down, then essentially he'd be willing to listen. People considered that to be a contradiction in terms, but I did a video where I spoke about what he was ultimately trying to say in my humble opinion, because between those two statements, you could see he was very concerned about people assuming he was ducking. In other words, he didn't want people to think I'm stepping aside because I feel like I can't win. If the money makes sense and it's a business-worthy proposition, then I'm going to accept it, but don't for 1 minute think I'm running. I will still want to conquer the world. And this particular deal makes sense in that regard. And let's talk about why. For a start, from a sheer financial perspective, you're getting 15 million for doing nothing. Now, from a perspective of actually becoming the undisputed heavyweight champion, it also increases his chances. Prior to this, he would have had to have beaten Alexander Usyk and then beaten Tyson Fury, 2 fights away from becoming the undisputed heavyweight champion. Whereas now, he's 1 fight away. If he gets to fight the winner, if he then beats the winner, he becomes the undisputed heavyweight champion, assuming that those titles do not become fragmented. But here's the thing. Of course, for us hardcore fans, to truly be the best beyond dispute, he will still have to beat the other remaining guys. If Tyson Fury was to beat Alexander Usyk and then Anthony Joshua beats Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk pipes up and says, whoa, hold up a second. We're 1-0, bro. And now you're telling me that you're the undisputed? Well, then you know he's going to have to fight him, right? He's also 1-1 with Ruiz. That might be a score he wants to settle just to ensure that history doesn't look back at it and say there was no clear victor. There is, of course, that rivalry with Deontay Wilder still looming too. So I'm not sitting here trying to tell you that Anthony Joshua is 1 fight away from being able to retire and walk away from the sport as the king of the era, in the same way that Tyson Fury is not in that position either. There are still a lot of top guys in the same era. It's a very stacked division, and there still needs to be some resolution with regards to who's fighting whom. Nonetheless, from the perspective of who is officially the undisputed heavyweight champion, something that will go down in history, he's now 1 fight away rather than 2. Where else does it make sense? Well, he's been shopping around for a lot of trainers, hasn't he? And while it looks like he just wants to present everyone with the opportunity for Usyk and Fury, the truth is, it gives him time, not just to scout these 2 guys when they fight each other, but to prepare and work on whatever he wants to work on to alter himself, become the new and improved Anthony Joshua. He's already adapted and adjusted once in terms of his abilities and his style. This would be Anthony Joshua 3.0 in some regards, and that takes time. This is something that Hatman has been saying for a long time. This is what he feels is necessary for Anthony Joshua, and to a large extent I agree. The only thing I'll say is that if Anthony Joshua was not fighting Alexander Usyk next, and Alexander Usyk was somebody like Charles Martin, do you actually believe that he would have accepted step aside? No. He would have knocked Charles Martin out, and then he would have gone for Tyson Fury. So there is a part of Anthony Joshua, subconsciously, who has accepted that at this point, he is inferior to Alexander Usyk. So although this makes sense, what he's done, it also adds this element within his mind, which says to him, Anthony, there is a very good chance you would lose again. You need to improve. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it will mean that he's going to have to work even harder to reach that pinnacle again. However, for a guy that has always had this air of invincibility about him in terms of his mindset, this is a very severe thing to have to accept as an athlete who always sought to seek and destroy. That's just something to think about a little bit. Now, moving on from that, Bob Arum has said that the one guy that he believes will be equipped to beat Deontay Wilder by the end of this year is Anderson. I would be prepared to discuss a potential Wilder versus Anderson fight by the end of this year. We are grooming him to be the next heavyweight champion after Tyson Fury. Fury himself and indeed his brother Shane have both said that based on what they've seen in the gym, they believe that Jared Anderson will go on to become the dominant heavyweight after Fury walks away from the sport. Jared Anderson himself put out a very controversial tweet where he said, if only guys had seen what I do to their favorite heavyweight inside the gym. And this was after Fury had beaten Deontay Wilder in their third fight. He later came out to deny that he was talking about Tyson Fury. I'm not too sure who he could have been talking about, considering he was in camp with him and he's referring to people's favorite heavyweight. But this is clearly a kid with an awful lot of confidence, and he's very highly rated, and rightly so. He's got fantastic movement. He sets traps. He has an understanding of distance. He can throw sharp, pot shot in accurate shots, as well as walk you down and try and up the tempo on you. I do think he needs to improve a little bit with his punch and power. He's only 22 years old. That man strength might come. So despite being 11 wins and 11 knockouts, he does land very consistently on opponents. And against guys at a much higher level, he wouldn't be landing as flush. Having said that, if he's going to have the speed advantage and the agility advantage, there is more than one way to skin a cat. You don't have to knock him out, right? You can outbox him, and he's a real prospect that you're going to have to consider. Now, a lot of people have taken almost offense to this. How dare he talk about Deontay Wilder in this way? The only guy to stop Wilder is Tyson Fury, and everybody's talking like the guy's a bum. This is true. Deontay Wilder is becoming very, very underappreciated. Nonetheless, a year from now, Bob Arum says he would be willing to discuss the fight. Well, that could mean another year away from making the fight. So you're talking about potentially 2 years from now. Now, that would mean Deontay Wilder's 38 years old. He's just had a very, very difficult 3 fights where he's accrued certain damage, where he would have left something in the ring. God forbid, you don't want that to be the case, but this is the reality of our sport. And Jared Anderson is going to get more man strength. He'll be 24 by then. He would have learned more of his craft, and the talent is there. So there's no reason why people should be sleeping on Jared Anderson, and there's no reason people should be getting angry at this comment. Bob Arum's doing what he's supposed to do. He's supposed to be bigging up his prospect. Barry Hearn, when Anthony Joshua was a prospect, was saying Anthony Joshua is the best young talent he's seen since Muhammad Ali. As Frank Warren was doing the same thing about Daniel Dubois. They want you to be talking about them. Whether you're mugging them off or whether you're agreeing, they want you to be talking about them. They want them to be in your radar. Now, a cynic would also argue that the timing of this provides a very interesting PR play, a real interesting strategy, because Bud Crawford is taking Bob Arum to court for racial bias, claiming that he is neither willing nor capable of promoting black fighters. And as a result, it's a breach of contract, and that has cost Terence Crawford an awful lot of money. Well, think about what Bob Arum is saying here. Think about the message. We are grooming Jared Anderson to be the next heavyweight champion of the world. Not we're going to groom, not we believe he can be, not we believe in this kid's potential. We are grooming. In other words, we are in the process of creating the next king of the most prestigious division in the sport, and that king is black. He's African American. So the limitations of Terence Crawford have nothing to do with us and our unwillingness to promote him and push him. They're to do with Bud himself and his marketability or lack of, right? Now you might say, Chris, I really doubt when he's talking about Jared Anderson, he's even thinking about Terence Crawford. Well, a cynic might then point to this particular interview, which occurred a few days ago with FightHype.com, where Bob Arum is talking to Lance Pugmire, and they're talking about the past. They're harking back to the past. And they're talking about Muhammad Ali. They mentioned Sugar Ray Leonard. They mentioned George Foreman and Oscar de la Hoya. And basically, Bob Arum is talking about it would be unfair to compare anybody to Ali. There has never been another Ali. There will never be another Ali in his lifetime, because he presented some serious topics and he did them with humor. He spoke about how profound Muhammad Ali was, and that unlike some of the other guys, he says, listen, George Foreman was very funny when he made his comeback, his second career, so to speak, but although he was funny, he was not profound. And while the interviewer suggests, look, you've had other guys that have also been pretty boys like Oscar de la Hoya, he says, yeah, listen, they might have been him and Leonard and what have you, but again, they didn't have the message of Muhammad Ali. Ali was invested in a message, and these are his words now, Bob Arum's words, not mine. He was invested in a message that black is beautiful and that black people had a place in society. And what an important message that was. Now, needless to say, none of us are going to argue the question of whether black people deserve a position in society, but the timing of this particular interview is interesting, is it not? to talk about something that occurred so many years ago on January the 19th, 2022, after all this blew up with Terence Crawford? I don't know, maybe not. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Maybe he's solely focused on Jared Anderson. But if Jared Anderson is going to be delighted with Bob Arum and the service that he's providing, Bob Arum can turn around and say, look, we're in the process of creating a future star, and it's only Bud Crawford that has an issue with us. It's not other African-American fighters. Now, moving on from that, I'll let you ponder and make your decisions on that. Amir Khan has come out in the build-up to this Brook fight, and he's speaking about some of the decisions he's made, and he says, listen, I got knocked out when I fought Canelo by one of the best Mexican fighters of all time, and I only took the fight because Floyd Mayweather is a coward and he wouldn't fight me. So I said, cool, let's do it. It's a mismatch on paper, but it was amazing, really, and I earned my respect. I weighed in at 158 pounds on the night, and he was 187. It was crazy. At the weigh-in, he didn't seem that big, but when I saw him in the corner, I was thinking, what am I doing here? He had his back to me. It was huge. Not only does this downplay the defeat at the hands of Canelo Alvarez, because he's saying, look, I only lost him because he's so massive, it's also a dig at Floyd Mayweather. And needless to say, this is going to get people talking again, because this was a verbal rivalry that went on for a very long time. Now, I know the haters of Amir Khan are going to end up getting very angry at me for saying this, but one thing I've always said for a very long time, styles make fights. And an 8 out of 10 fighter can beat a 9 out of 10 fighter if he's all wrong for him. But if you go back to the time, you will realize that Amir Khan was, according to all the press, set for a blockbuster clash with Floyd Mayweather because Floyd put out a public vote, a poll. And he had Amir Khan or Marcos Maidana as the options for the next opponent. Khan won the vote. He ended up fighting Marcos Maidana twice. He ended up fighting Robert Guerrero. He ended up fighting Andre Berto. In all those cases, Amir Khan was the bigger name, the bigger star. He'd beaten Marcos Maidana and dropped him in the past. And there was more money to be made globally from fighting Amir Khan. He never fought him. I'll let you make your decision as to why that was. All I'll say is this. Floyd and Khan, there's no doubt about who the superior fighter was. But styles make fights. Floyd was a low-volume, pot-shotting counterpuncher who was very reliant on his reach. Amir Khan was taller. He didn't quite have the reach of Floyd, but the reach advantage wouldn't have been as prominent. And we know that Amir Khan could throw punches in bunches, very, very fast combinations, where he could change the height dynamic of the punch. The trajectory didn't always have to be the same way. You saw against guys like Collazo and Devin Alexander, some of the best performances in his career. These guys were trying to change the height dynamic against him. It didn't make a difference. He could rip shots to the body, rip them low, rip them high. He was a very, very good fighter, Amir Khan. And against a counter-puncher who's looking to counter off of one particular shot, he's not the ideal guy to fight. He's a nightmare for a counter-puncher. What you want to do to beat Amir Khan is time him. You want to punch with him. And because of his volume and his speed and the fact that that wouldn't really slow down, he had a great engine as well, you had to land as he's landing and have the power to take him out. Well, Floyd Mayweather wasn't a one-punch knockout artist. He also wasn't the sort of guy that would chase a guy around the ring. He could walk a guy down when the guy would be willing to give up a pocket, kind of like Canelo Alvarez. But when he has to chase his opponent, Floyd wasn't quite as effective, or at least he didn't prove it during his career. This would have been a very difficult fight for Floyd stylistically. And what this does for Amir Khan is get it back out there in the public sphere. A lot of you are going to say to me, shut up, Chris, Khan would have got knocked out. Just go and look at how many knockouts Floyd Mayweather had in the last, 10 years of his career. And if he hadn't knocked Amir Khan out, would he have been able to have outworked Amir Khan? Khan's not the sort of guy that would have struggled to get close, and then once he would have been close, he would have tried to ball in with these big hooks, and Floyd would have rolled off the ropes behind that Philly shell and kept him at bay. No, that wouldn't have worked against Amir Khan. It would have been a very tough fight for Floyd. It would have been one of the toughest fights in his career, in my humble opinion. And Floyd would have known that. He was a master at understanding when to fight what particular fighter. He knew that. He was a great businessman, Floyd. And this is going to get people talking about it. I'm sure, like I said, there are going to be a lot of comments down below telling me you're talking rubbish. And this is the point of what Amir Khan's doing. It's a method of promoting the Brook fight. It's very smart. They're doing a good job in this promotion. And a lot of people were initially saying they weren't going to watch the fight. Well, believe me, I know a lot of you guys are going to be tuning in, and I personally am one of those that can't wait for it. Mike Tyson, in an interview, has basically said that with Triller, he's yet to receive all of the money that he was promised, a reported $10 million minimum purse. It was on the Full Send podcast with the UFC president Dana White, and Dana White asked him if he'd received all this money, and Mike Tyson said most of it, but there's still a bunch that's held up, and I can't even say anything about this. Yeah, it was really tricky. And Dana White said, yep, that's what they should call it, tricky instead of Triller. Now, as I'm sure you guys are aware, Dana White himself gets criticized an awful lot when it comes to the amount he pays his fighters. And in fact, one of the boxing journalists or sports journalists in general recently, Adrian Hale, came out and said the total combined payout for every fighter at UFC 270 was $1.8 million. Fury made $30 million in his third fight against Wilder. Wilder made $20 million. Fury and Wilder made 25 times more than all the UFC 270 fighters combined. Tell me that UFC fighters' pay isn't an issue. He's referring to the Ngannou-Gane fight here. But the thing is, they do get paid a lot more money behind the scenes. There are a lot of bonuses involved. They get a pay-per-view cut and stuff like that. So these numbers aren't necessarily reflective. But I think there's, this war that's starting, war of words between Dana White basically saying, look, boxers don't always get paid what they deserve to be paid. They don't even get paid on time often. A lot of promoters get sued about things like this. So he's trying to essentially argue, look, we run things professionally, unlike groups like Triller, who should be called tricky. Thank you for watching, everyone. Please take the time to hit that like button, subscribe button, and notifications button. It only takes a couple of seconds. Give me your feedback on everything that you've heard here today. Thanks for watching. Take care, and God bless.